Obsessed with this book, The Water Dancer. It's been really, really amazing. So there's a little part that I like that I think that we should read. So we're just going to jump right in. So this is like chapter 2-ish. All right. So the people we need to know in the story so far are Hiram or Hi, and he's basically a slave. And his father is the owner of the plantation, and his brother, he and his brother are like the same age, and but the brother's white and he's black. So long, well, not so long because it's just chapter 2, but towards the beginning of the book, it's noticed that Hi has like a really good memory. He can retain a lot of information. So, of course, his master and father sees this in him, and he's like, oh, wow, this is an important skill. Let me see what's up with this guy. So he invites him, and his mother's been sold already, invites him and another woman that he went and lived with when his mother was sold. And they have moved into the big house, and Hiram is basically starting to get preferential treatment, including lessons. And we know that's a big deal for a slave. So the lessons begin: reading, arithmetic, some oratory, and my world bloomed with them. My ravenous memory filled with images and now words, which were so much more than I had before believed. Words with their own shape, rhythm, and color. Words that were pictures themselves. We would meet 3 times a week for an hour. My time always following Maynard's. Maynard's the brother. And though I know that he tried his best not to show it, I could always just see the relief in Mr. Field's face when Maynard departed and I entered. This moment became a source not just of pride, but of quiet derision. I was better than Maynard, given so much less, yet made of so much more. He was clumsy. He squinted constantly, and as if always searching for the next foothold. He was intelligent and rude. My father would have guests over for tea, and Maynard would think nothing of bursting in and speaking whatever thought possessed him. He loved to jest, and that was the best part of him. But even that quality betrayed him into telling crass jokes to the young daughters of quality. At supper, he reached across the table for rolls, spoke with a mouth full of food. I was certain my father saw things as I did, and I wondered how wrong it must have felt to see the best of you emerge in this way. In this place you didn't expect. Indeed, in the place your whole world depends on it never appearing. I tried to remember the street and Thena's admonition, they ain't your family. But seeing the estate as I did now, rolling green hills in the summer, woods blooming in red and gold in the fall, and then in winter, a snow dappling everything, and seeing, though living below, the main house of the Lockwis, the great columns of the portico, and the setting sun casting itself through the fanlight, seeing the winding corridors, seeing the grand portraits of my grandfather and grandmother, my eyes and theirs. I began in my quiet moments to imagine myself in their ranks. And there was my father, who would pull me aside and tell me of our lineage, stretching back through his father, John Walker, back through the progenitor, Archibald Walker, who walked here with a mule, 2 horses, his wife Judith, 2 young boys, and 10 tasking men. I would tell these stories as if granting in these asides, teasing shares of my inheritance, and I never forgot. There were evenings, the task complete, when I would wander to the far east edge of the property, past a sprawl of timothy grass and clover, and stand reverent before the stone monument that marked the spot where the first plots that became lockless were cleared. And when my father told me the stories passed from his grandfather of chasing off catamounts, of hunting bear with a Bowie knife, of felling trees, hauling up stones, diverting creeks, and by his own hand bringing forth the estate I then beheld, how could I not want to claim this? The courage and wit and all that glory it built with its strong arms as my inheritance. But too, with all of that imagining, the facts of Lochless began to make themselves manifest. There were, of course, tales of Pete and Ella, their invocations of Natchez and Baton Rouge. There was the tragedy of Big John, of my mother. And to all of this, I now began to add my own stray readings. When left in my father's office of DeBoe's Review, which harped constantly on the falling price of tobacco, and then finally the conversation of quality themselves, it was tobacco that made for the largest of Lochless, indeed the largest of Elm County. And every year, the tobacco yield shrank. The entail of those high families of Virginia shrank with them. The days of tobacco leaves, large as elephant ears, were no more, not in Elm County at least, where the crop after crop had exhausted the land. But out west, past the Valley Mountains, on the Mississippi banks down Natchez Way, there was land in need of improvement, in need of masters to superintend and men to harvest and hoe, men such as those diminishing fields of Lochless. Used to be, they were ashamed to sell a man, I heard Pete once say while I was working in the kitchen. Easy to have shame when you have got the harvest, Ella answered. Try shame when you're a dirt farmer. These were the last words I ever heard from Ella. A week later, she was gone. My young way of understanding all this was singular, a sense that what that really had doomed Lochless was not the land, but the men who managed it. I began to see Maynard as an outrageous example of his entire class. I envied them. I was horrified by them. As I learned the house, I began to read, and I began to see more of the quality. I saw that just as the fields and its workers were an engine of everything, the house itself would have been lost without those tasked within it. My father, like all the masters, built an entire apparatus to disguise this weakness, to hide how prostrate they truly were. The tunnel where I first entered the house was the only entrance that the tasked were allowed to use. And this was not only for the master's exaltation, but to hide us. For the tunnel was but one of the many engineering marvels built into Lochless so as to make it appear powered by some imperceptible energy. There were dumbwaiters that made the sumptuous supper appear from nothing. Levers that seemed to magically retrieve the right bottle of wine hidden deep in the manor's bowels. Cots in the sleeping quarters, drawn under the canopy bed, because those charged with emptying the chamber pot must be hidden even more than the chamber pot itself. The magic wall that slid away from me that first day and opened the gleaming world of the house hid back stairways that led down to the Warrens, the engine room of Lochless, where no guest would ever visit. And when we did appear in the polite areas of the house, as we did during soirees, we were made to appear in such appealing dress and grooming that no one could imagine that we were not slaves at all, but mystical ornaments, a portion of the manor's charm. But I knew the truth, that the Maynard folly, though more profane, was unoriginal. The masters could not bring water to boil, harness a horse, nor strap their own drawers without us. We were better than them. We had to be. Sloth was literal death for us, while for them, it was the whole ambition of their lives. It occurred to me then that even my own intelligence was unexceptional, for you could not set eyes anywhere on Lochless and not see the genius in its markers, genius in the hands that carved out the columns of the portico, Genius in the songs we evoked, even in the whites. The deepest genius in the songs that evoked, even in the whites. The deepest of joys and sorrows, genius in the men who made the fiddle strings whine and trill at their dances. Genius in the bouquet of flavors served up from the kitchen. Genius in all our lost. Genius in Big John. Genius in my mother. I imagined that my own quality might someday be recognized then. Perhaps I, one who understood the workings of the house, the workings of the field, the span of the larger world, might be deemed the true heir, the rightful heir of Lockless. With this broad knowledge, I would make the fields bloom again, and in that way, save us all from the auction and separation of descent into the darkness of Natchez, which was the coffin, which was all that awaited. I knew under the rule of Maynard. Well, pretty good stuff here with Ta-Nehisi Coates. That was a little piece of chapter 2. Check it out.